This is CNN Tonight. I'm Don Lemon. The Trump administration setting itself up for another showdown with House Democrats, this time over President Trump's personal tax returns. The Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin refusing to release them. The chairman of the powerful House Ways and Means Committee had requested 6 years of returns. Congressman Richard Neal saying he'll weigh his testimony, his next move, I should say, which could include issuing a subpoena for them. Meanwhile, the House Judiciary Committee has set a vote Wednesday on whether to hold the Attorney General William Barr in contempt of Congress for ignoring a subpoena to turn over the unredacted Mueller report. Committee staff and Justice Department officials are meeting tomorrow to see if they can reach a deal. Also tonight, the White House trying to backtrack from President Trump's weekend tweet that Robert Mueller should not testify before Congress. An official telling CNN the president was just expressing his opinion because the investigation is over and it is time to move on. Lots to discuss. John Sale is here. John Dean. Gentlemen, good evening. So good to see both of you. John Dean, let's start with you. The president has been all over the place when it comes to Mueller testifying. Is he worried his claim of exoneration is going to go up in flames?
Well, I think he knows his claim of exoneration is going to go up in flames if Mueller and when Mueller testifies. For indeed, that's exactly what's going to happen. And, you know, this effort to try to put out a bogus story and spin this is only going to last so long once Mueller gets out there, and his testimony is going to be, I think, very powerful.
John Dean, you know better than most the strategy behind when and whether to testify to Congress. Do you think it's possible the Attorney General stops Mueller from testifying?
Well, you know, as long as Mueller is an employee of the Department of Justice, which he is right now, he could have some say in that. But I don't, from all reports, at least the last reports, is that Mueller's on his way out and is not going to be an employee. And he certainly has no influence or power over him then. He might try to persuade him not to testify. But I think Mueller, given the fact that he has been trashed, not only by the president, but by the attorney general, needs to stand up and explain what he's done, why he's done it, for his own reputation's sake.
Yeah. You have, how do you feel about this? Because you think that he's going to be gone soon, and what? What's your take?
Well, first, let me say hello to John. It's been a long time. And who would have thought, John, 20, 40 years, I'm not going to say how many years ago, that we would both be sitting and analyzing another, what people think is another Watergate. Well, I disagree a little bit with John. I think that Bob Mueller is going to play it by the book, and I think he will resign soon, but I think he will still not, he will disappoint us if he testifies, because prosecutors really should not be explaining in public all of their reasoning behind what they do, because they can't help but get into talking about the reputation of people who were never charged. So I think he's going to play it by the book, and if he's instructed to assert a privilege, he'll do it, and then it would go to court. And so let me just say one other quick thing.
Yeah.
Don McGahn invoked the Saturday Night Massacre. Let me tell you that there's nothing like that. John Dean, he got out of Dodge. He knew that there was something wrong. He told the president there was a cancer on the presidency. He got out. There was no Saturday. I was fired in the Saturday Night Massacre. I know what has happened. Here, the president, despite all the talks, he didn't fire anybody, and Mueller did complete his work.
And that's why Mueller said what he said in the report. You think basically Mueller will testify, he'll get up there in front of Congress or whomever said it in front of Congress and just say basically what is in his letters and what was in the report, and not really saying, well, I couldn't, because they're going to ask him specifically. This is what I'm going to ask you. They're going to ask him specifically, if he wasn't president of the United States, would he have been charged? That's going to be the question.
Well, my predictions have been wrong before, but I think he's going to say the report speaks for itself.
Gotcha.
But we'll see.
What do you think, John?
I think that's very possible as well. He is an establishmentarian. He is a by-the-book kind of guy. But I think he does want to explain his position, which is not what the Attorney General is telling the world, or the President is telling the world, is in his report. And since most people won't read that report, his testimony can be very important to informing people as to what actually he did say. All he has to do is go by the book.
Yeah. Listen, John Dean, remember Mueller disagreed with Barr's characterization of his report, saying that he got the context and nature and the substance wrong, and Barr called Mueller's report snitty. What do you think Congress, I said Congress is going to want to say to him, would he have been charged with obstruction of justice if he were not president of the United States? What do you think that they want to ask him about?
He may stay away from hypotheticals, given the position he's in. That puts him in an awkward position to answer hypotheticals. But that hypothetical was certainly answered today by 500 plus prosecutors if they faced a decision how they would come down on it, and that is they would prosecute.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's what, listen, over 500 former federal prosecutors said that they wouldn't, if he were not president, that he would have been charged. And so that'll be interesting to hear Mueller's reasoning for that, at least. Go on, John Sale. Tell me.
Don, I was an assistant U.S. attorney here in the Southern District of New York and in Watergate and in Miami, where I live now. Prosecutive decisions cannot be made by a vote. The one person had that responsibility. And if Mueller, who plays it by the book, his charter was different from Watergate, was different from Ken Starr's. It said not may, it said he shall determine whether or not he's going to prosecute, or we use the word decline. And I think he didn't do that. So we're all speculating as to why, but I think he owed it to the American people, frankly. I think they did a great job, but I think he should have bitten the bullet, and he should have said, if he weren't president, I would prosecute him, if that's the case.
So we had two former prosecutors who signed on to this letter earlier, who one of them said explicitly the same thing that you're saying. The other one says he basically did say that, but he wanted to, I guess, be a little bit more judicious and didn't want to. He didn't, because the president would not have the chance to defend himself had he said that.
Oh, that's right. But everyone is saying that he did not exonerate the president.
Well, that's what I want to ask you.
Go on.
That's what I ask you. So then they're going to want to ask him, what was his intent? Why did he say he didn't exonerate the president?
I've been doing this for a long time. I've been a criminal white-collar defense lawyer forever. I've yet to see an exoneration. There's no such thing. Prosecutors do not exonerate. They either charge or they close the file and they decline. They don't exonerate. It's just not what they do. So everybody's talking about that. It just is not part of what we all do who are in this business.
Why on earth did he do it? So why did he say that?
That was something, in fairness to Barr, in Barr's 4-page letter, whatever you want to call it, he added, the president's not exonerated. Well, that was something, in fairness to Barr, which we're not emphasizing.
Mm-hmm. What do you say? John Dean, you want to weigh in on that?
Well, I would say that Barr was doing it to try to spin the public impression of what was in the report, and did a pretty effective job of spinning it. That's why I think Mueller needs to testify.
Yeah. So, John Dean, over the weekend, speaking of that, the president tweeted falsely, there are no high crimes and misdemeanors, no collusion, no conspiracy, no obstruction. All the crimes are on the other side, and that's what the Dems should be looking at, but they won't. Nevertheless, the tables are turning. So he says the crimes are on the other side, but today it was Trump's former attorney who went to prison. Is he projecting here?
Don, what I think he's doing, and if he does it, is to go after the prosecutors. That's a form of obstruction, and he can't do that. And this is an ongoing situation. Watch what he does with the Congress and how he handles it. Watch what he does with Cohn. Watch where he handles himself. He's still very much under the eye of the Congress now, that has the power to impeach him.
Yeah. John Sale, I know you want to weigh in, but let me just play this and then get you to weigh in,
Sure.
because this is what Michael Cohen said before reporting to prison today. Check it out.
I hope that when I rejoin my family and friends, that the country will be in a place without xenophobia, injustice, and lies at the helm of our country. There still remains much to be told, and I look forward to the day that I can share the truth.
So I want to hear what you have to say, but he's saying there's more to be told. What do you think that is?
If you have enough time, I would like to hear John Dean tell me if...
I don't have enough time. Sorry.
To be continued. If he, after he was sentenced, would ever go out and hold a press conference, what Michael Cohen is saying is, reduce my sentence and I'm going to tell whatever I have to. If they're relying on Michael Cohen, they have a very thin case.
We'll make enough time for him to answer that. You want him to answer it? Go ahead, John Dean.
Yes, the special prosecutor even asked me not to write a book, and I agreed not to do that, even though I had very large contracts dangled in front of me. I waited until we cleaned everything up, until I decided to speak out, and the record, I think, was the right way to do it. If Lanny Davis, his lawyer, had asked me about that press conference, I'd say, don't do that, Lanny.
So John and I agree, which is nice, John.
Yeah. Thank you. This was a fascinating conversation.
Thanks,
I really
John.
enjoyed it. I love having you here on Set
My
with Me.
pleasure.
We love having you on, and of course, John Dean, we love having you on as well, getting both of your perspectives. Is the case in Washington, I should say, distracting us from rising tensions with North Korea and Iran? And what is the president's foreign policy anyway? We're going to dig into that. That's next. Masking serious and dangerous foreign policy issues the U.S. is facing around the world. That includes rising tensions with Iran, which President Trump's National Security Advisor John Bolton calls troubling. I want to bring in now Susan Glasser and Max Boot. Max is the author of The Corrosion of Conservatism, Why I Left the Right. Good evening to both of you. Thank you. Happy Monday to both of you. Max, I want to start with your recent column, and here's what you wrote, and I quote, you said, "This nation is at the mercy of a criminal administration." Why do you say that?
Well, that's my assessment, Don, of where we stand with President Trump. Now, you've seen in the Mueller report that the special counsel found that Trump was guilty of multiple counts of obstruction of justice. You now have over 500 former federal prosecutors coming forward to say that Trump would have been indicted if he were not president. And yet Trump is compounding his flouting of the law by refusing to comply with congressional subpoenas. And just now we had Steve Mnuchin, the Secretary of the Treasury, refusing to hand over the Trump tax returns that he's legally obligated to hand over. Mm-hmm. And so this is another high crime and misdemeanor, another grounds for impeachment. And yet the problem is there is not going to be impeachment because Republicans in the Senate, like the O.J. Simpson jury, will protect Trump no matter what the evidence says. And in fact, in all likelihood, the Democrats will not even push forward with impeachment in the House. They will try to enforce their subpoenas through the court system, but it could take years to accomplish that. And so at the end of the day, there's really no way to make President Trump comply with the law short of actually voting him out of office. And that won't occur at a minimum for another 18 months. And so that's why I said that we are really at the mercy of a criminal administration headed by a president who has clearly broken the law and so far has not paid a price for it.
You also write this. You said, "We are left with the dismaying likelihood that the president will now feel emboldened to commit ever greater transgressions to hold onto power and thus delay a possible post-presidential indictment," right? So,
yeah, I think that's a real concern. I mean, there was just some reporting a few days ago in the New York Times that President Trump and Rudy Giuliani are trying to instigate a Justice Department investigation of Joe Biden on these trumped-up charges of corruption in Ukraine, which suggests that they are trying to weaponize the legal system against their opponents, just as Trump already called for the Justice Department to investigate Hillary Clinton. Now he's trying to do the same with his leading rival in the 2020 election. This is a very dangerous moment where if he's gotten away with these high crimes and misdemeanors already, he's going to feel emboldened, I think, to do more of the same because he knows that as soon as he leaves office, he faces the very real prospect of indictment. And so he has a real incentive to double down on his law breaking so he can stay in office.
Susan, with all of the chaos in Washington, it's easy to lose sight of rising tensions beyond our borders, like North Korea testing missiles, tensions heating up with Iran, Trump refusing to warn Putin about staying out of our election. What is Trump's foreign policy right now?
Good question. Well, one point I think that's important to make, Don, is that those events you mentioned, Iran, North Korea, tensions there, they're not unrelated to Trump. These are not things that would just be organically happening in the world anyways if we were not all distracted and focused on things in Washington. Those are direct responses to the disruption that President Trump has essentially unleashed on the world when it comes to his foreign policy. In North Korea, for example, this is exactly what you could have predicted would occur after the collapse of Trump's negotiations with Kim Jong-un in Hanoi. There was this very embarrassing failed superpower summit, essentially nuclear summit, I should say. North Korea is definitely not a superpower. And as a result of that, Kim Jong-un has restarted missile testing. These appear to be short-range rather than long-range intercontinental ballistic missiles. Why? It seems to me that he's desperately looking for a way to get Trump not only back to the negotiating table, but trying to find a way to signal that the U.S. needs to change its negotiating position. Kim has said he is giving it till the end of the year in these talks. Otherwise, presumably, he'll restart and more aggressively his nuclear development program. So I think that is an example of a direct consequence of Trump's very aggressive and in some cases reckless foreign policy in the world. When it comes to Iran, this is actually the 1-year anniversary, more or less, of the administration's decision to pull out of the Iran nuclear deal, which was negotiated not only by the United States, but by 5 other leading world powers, even though Iran was judged to be in compliance with the terms of the agreement by international monitors. What's happened in the year since then? A lot of tough talk, a lot of bluster, a lot of rhetoric, and essentially what we've done is we've really just continued to open up a further rift between the United States and its European allies who remain partners in the deal with Iran. And now you have a situation where John Bolton, the national security advisor, is announcing the deployment of an aircraft carrier in the Gulf, which he says is a response to the Iranian provocations. Well, again, usually it's the Pentagon or the president himself who makes such decisions, not the national security advisor, who's supposed to be a staffer. I think it tells you where some of the saber rattling and bluster is coming from.
Mm-hmm. Max, look, the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, met with his Russian counterpart today, Sergei Lavrov. Pompeo says that he told him that it's, quote, not appropriate for Russia to meddle in U.S. elections. Why can't the president just say that to Putin?
That's a great question, Don. That's the big question that nobody can answer, even after the release of the Mueller report. I mean, just last week, you had yet another conversation between Trump and Putin, which, according to the Kremlin, lasted 90 minutes. And yet Trump admitted that he never challenged Putin on whether he's going to interfere in the 2020 election. He never warned him away from further interference in the U.S. election. Instead, Trump claimed that he reveled with Putin in the dismissal of the so-called Russian hoax. And you kind of have to wonder, why isn't Trump being tougher on Putin, if only in his own self-interest? Because it would be to his political advantage to call out Putin, to act tough, to bluster, to denounce Putin's interference, because it would basically make these questions about what does Putin have on Trump, it would make those questions go away. But Trump refuses to do it. He just will not talk tough about Putin. And so you had this bizarre situation where he was even vouching for Putin in Venezuela at the same time that his Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, was calling out Russia, and rightfully so, for its interference in Venezuela to prop up the Maduro regime. And Trump was basically giving Putin a clean bill of health. It is just puzzling. And, this reminds me that we still don't know the results of the FBI counterintelligence investigation of Putin. We still don't know, of Trump rather. We still don't know what's in Trump's finances. And those are all questions that I think we need to have answered so we have better clarity on the nature of the Trump-Putin relationship.
Yeah. Thank you both. Appreciate your time. A new poll shows the president at an all-time high for his approval rating, but there's one big caveat. Plus, what could be the key to the president winning a second term or not? With a booming economy continuing to create jobs and the unemployment rate at a 50-year low, President Trump says he'll run for re-election next year on the strength of the economy. But will voters in important swing states that he won in 2016, like Michigan, give him 4 more years? CNN's Miguel Marquez takes a look.
Saginaw, Michigan, for several years now, the once thriving industrial city growing again. Many Republicans here credit the president.
I believe that the economy is going to help him take victory again in 2020.
Early in his 2016 run, then candidate Trump campaigned here. It paid off. He carried Saginaw County by a little more than a point after Barack Obama won it by double digits in his 2 runs. Trump became the first Republican since Ronald Reagan in 1984 to capture Michigan by a margin of fewer than 11,000 votes. Construction here booming, with projects started long before 2016.
This is all electrical here. instrumentation.
Jimmy Green trains apprentices for the construction industry. In 2012, he had 126 trainees. Today, he has over 600.
Have you seen new big projects in Saginaw since the 2016 election?
No.
Green, a lifelong moderate Republican, he's no fan of the president, who he says will have a tough time repeating his Saginaw County win in 2020.
How big does the economy factor into the 2020 race?
It is the factor. There is absolutely nothing else that President Trump can hold